of the Special Committee on the Economic Relationship between Canada and the United States. Pursuant to the motion adopted by the House on February 16th, 2021, the Special Committee is meeting to discuss the economic relationship between Canada and the United States. Today, we are continuing our examination of Buy America procurement policies. I would now like to welcome our witnesses. From the Université de Sherbrooke, Geneviève Dufort, Professeur Titulaire, Loyola Marymount University, Justin Hughes, Distinguished Professor of Law, and from the Trade Justice Network, Ms. Angela McEwen, Co-Chair. Professeur Dufour, la parole est à vous pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Excusez-moi, j'ai pas entendu.
I'm sorry, I believe you asked me to begin. Very well, thank you. I apologize. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to appear before you to speak specifically about Buy America and the recently passed presidential decree. You heard from several government officials, including some ministers, that they would not let the Biden administration further restrict access conditions for our companies to the American market, and that they would try to obtain a general waiver. You also had a speaker who spoke about a sectoral agreement with the U.S. Clearly, I can't cover everything in this presentation, but I want you to know that the room for maneuver under international economic law to respond to Buy America measures is extremely narrow. And unfortunately, I'm going to run counter to what you've said. According to my own analysis, the United States cannot legally negotiate an agreement with Canada this time, nor would it be possible to conclude a sectoral agreement. And let me explain the reasons. The United States and Canada are among the 48 states in the world to be party to the WTO agreement that we'll call a WTO Agreement on Government Procurement. This means that Canada and the U.S. have agreed to submit their government procurement to international competition. However, in terms of public procurement, each state has the possibility of restricting its commitment. In other words, each state determines which entities are subject to the opening of markets, which products or services are covered, and above what amount the agreement applies. And in its schedules of commitments, the United States has inserted important limitations to allow it to continue to give preference to its suppliers in government procurement. It is therefore, because of these limitations, that the United States can have measures such as those arising from Buy America. Now, can the U.S. give a waiver to Canadian suppliers? Unfortunately, the answer is no. In fact, the agreement on government contracts provides for compliance by state parties with the FMN clause, that is the most favored nation principle. In law, this clause has a simple application. If a state gives an advantage to another state, it must extend it to all states party to the agreement. In other words, if the United States gives Canadian companies preferential access to government procurement contracts subject to Buy America, it must extend this preference to the 46 other states party to the WTO GPA. You might say, however, that the United States had agreed to a general waiver for Canada in 2010 following the Obama administration's massive investment plan, but the context has changed. In fact, there is an exception to the MFN clause that I just mentioned, that of free trade agreements. In other words, if states conclude a free trade agreement, they can give each other mutual preferences, that is, in fact, the objective, without having to extend these preferences to other states. But beware. For this exception to come into play, there must be a free trade agreement that is in good and due form, and this excludes sectoral agreements. I can explain why during the question period. In 2010, when Canada negotiated from the Obama administration the fact that Canadian suppliers could participate in U.S. set-asides, we had a free trade agreement in place, NAFTA, which covered government procurement. In other words, NAFTA allowed us to have a preferential agreement with the United States on government procurement. Today, the CUSMA has replaced NAFTA, and this new agreement does not contain any rules on government procurement governing relations between Canada and the United States. Therefore, we can no longer use this exception. In this context, there are 4 possible scenarios before us, and of course, I don't have time to cover them all, but here are a few. First of all, we accept this as a fact. We do not have a waiver, and our suppliers of goods and services cannot bid on a majority of large infrastructure projects in the States. In fact, they'll be able to bid on some projects that fall within the GPA, but it's very technical. In fact, for those markets not covered by GPA, American companies, that is, Canadian U.S. companies, will be able to request ad hoc waivers, but this is a very complex mechanism that does not provide any predictability for Canadian companies. As well, we do not accept a situation, and we open, once again, CUSMA. And again, after years of painful negotiations, and given that it's not certain that our government, that we're dealing with a protectionist government led by Biden, it's not sure that this is the right path. Another solution is to work with the U.S. to get a blanket waiver. But as I've explained to you, that would be a risk for the Americans because it would run the risk of going against free trade rules. Again, we'll see. And 4th possible scenario, and I think it's the one that we should focus on here. As soon as we know more about the Biden administration's specific actions, Canada then should move very quickly to undertake a comprehensive analysis of the compliance of the Buy America actions with the GPA and the commitment of the United States, because we can bet that some measures are legally questionable, and it would enable us to possibly launch a dialogue and to look at the measures of Buy America, and if there's no agreement, to move to a dispute settlement body before the WTO. Of course, this would not necessarily satisfy our desire to act quickly, but would put some pressure on the United States, especially if other important trading partners such as China or the EU join Canada. So this situation once again demonstrates our fragility in trade, a fragility that stems directly from our dependence on the U.S. market. The answer seems quite simple. We need to diversify export markets in Canada. However, this is slow to happen. There are a number of free trade agreements that have been concluded with other trading partners and with major trading blocs, but diversifying our companies has yet to occur. A number of factors can explain this. I don't have time to go into these, especially because this goes beyond the issues of trade relations with the United States, but I'll be very happy to come back to them if you have any questions. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm available to take questions.
Merci, Professor.
Thank you very much, Professor Dufour.
Mr. Hughes, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, mesdames et messieurs, thank you for inviting me to participate in today's session focused on President Biden's Buy America executive order. Merci pour l'invitation surprenante.
Thank you for the surprising invitation to allow us to take part in this session on the Buy America executive order.
Everyone knows that since the inauguration of the Biden administration, the administration has been focused intently on the COVID-19 pandemic and domestic economic issues, and has concomitantly been moving more cautiously on trade issues. In a sense, President Biden's January Buy American executive order falls between the two. I'm happy to talk about the executive order this evening, but I have to emphasize that I'm not part of the administration. I last served in the Obama-Biden administration in September 2013, so I'm speaking to you as a law professor who teaches international trade and pays a reasonable amount of attention to policy developments in Washington. As you know, the executive order does not change any of the statutory called Buy American or Buy America provisions. The executive order calls for a general tightening of department and agency implementation of the statutory provisions. It does this by doing the following: by establishing a centralized process for granting waivers to Buy American requirements, such that, quote, a description of the proposed waiver and a detailed justification, end quote, of the waiver must be submitted to the White House's Office of Management and Budget. It makes descriptions of these proposed waivers and justifications available on a publicly accessible website, and that is clearly intended to be a resource for American manufacturers who might want to bid on contracts that have not yet received a waiver. It allows the Office of Management and Budget to review each waiver and to decline to review the waiver. And the OMB may reject a waiver, in which case it goes back to the agency for further consideration and further analysis of the determination. All of that is supposed to happen through a new Made in America director in the Office of Management and Budget. The President's executive order also requires the Federal Acquisition Regulatory Council to study and consider changing the very elaborate, very detailed federal acquisition regulations in various ways that could increase the amount of federal purchases that have U.S. value added in it. And then, and this should be important to Canada, the executive order also calls for a longer-term assessment, agency by agency, of, quote, waivers issued pursuant to the Trade Agreements Act of 1979, separated by country of origin, end quote. Now, we are still in the earliest days of the implementation of the executive order. No Made in America director has yet been appointed by the White House, and my understanding is that so far, the Office of Management and Budget has been gathering information from agencies and departments on waivers that have been granted in the recent past, analyzing those waivers, and determining to what extent things can be tightened up. My impression.
J'ai l'impression, et ça c'est personnel, qu'ils n'ont pas encore identifié autant d'abus ou de relâchement dans le système de renonciation que prévu.
Sorry, I'm getting the French interpretation.
No, it's the interpreter's problem. Sorry, I'll go back to the French. Sorry.
Sorry about that, Mr. Sorry, go ahead.
I was also getting the French, but I was, listening to myself in two languages. I also think that the administration is looking at those waivers, not in terms of total number of American jobs, which might have been how the prior administration would look at that. But my understanding is especially in terms of critical supply chains and strategic production. Now, as everyone knows, and as Professor Dufour discussed, the U.S. commitment to the WTO Government Procurement Agreement, which benefits Canada at this time, effectively means that Buy American rules function as Buy from America and Friends rules. Separate from the executive order, I have to be honest with you that in the public statements accompanying the executive order, there is language that was exactly the same as one saw in an August 2020 policy paper from candidate Joe Biden, that the new administration will, quote, work with allies to modernize international trade rules and associated domestic regulations regarding government procurement to make sure that the U.S. and allies can use their own taxpayer dollars to spur investment in their own countries. Now, as I said in an op-ed piece I wrote a few months ago, anytime a government says they want to modernize international treaty obligations, that's a nice way to say they want to revise them, which is a nice way to say they'd like to break them. Now, I think that that means that long-term U.S. participation in the WTO's Government Procurement Act is not a foregone conclusion. If you follow Professor Dufour's logic, which I agree 98% with everything she said, that is not necessarily a bad scenario for Canada. It could mean that revision of the GPA in a way that permitted more regional collaboration, more localization of production, and more acceptance of the desirability of local special rules for procurement. I know that members of this committee are very concerned about Canadian access to the U.S. market, and I look forward to a discussion of these issues. Hopefully everyone keeping in mind that I can only give you a close observer's perspective, not any official perspective on what is happening inside the Beltway. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Professor Hughes. Now we will go to Ms. McEwen for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you for inviting me to appear on behalf of the Trade Justice Network. We're a coalition of environmental, civil society, student, Indigenous, cultural, farming, labor, and social justice organizations. We came together in 2010 to call for a new global trade regime that was focused on social justice, human rights, and environmental sustainability. The Canadian and U.S. economies are very tightly interconnected, with many goods, services, and even workers crossing the border every day. So the planned stimulus from the United States is good news for Canada's economy, especially Ontario's, because a stronger U.S. economy generally has positive spillover effects on this side of the border too. So I know we're concerned about Buy U.S., Buy American agreements excluding us from some of this money, but I think we need to keep in mind that any stimulus the federal government is offering in the U.S. will have spillover effects in Canada, and we will be we will likely benefit from it in the long run, even if we don't directly benefit from some of this spending. Even so, Canadians are rightfully concerned about Buy American clauses, hurting Canadian businesses and workers who had hoped to be able to bid on some of these large U.S. contracts. And there's also often a lot of confusion in the Canadian public because we've been told that we can't attach buy local requirements to our public procurement. So how is it that the United States gets away with doing this so openly? And as the previous two speakers explained, the answer is quite simple. So Canada is one of the very few nations that has given away our right to attach buy local provisions for subnational governments. The United States has never done so and does not intend to bind subnational government procurement to any of the international trade agreements that they are party to on the federal level. And as Professor Dufour said, the trade agreement that applies in this case is the World Trade Organization Government Agreement on Procurement, or the GPA, because there is no chapter covering government procurement in the updated CUSMA. So the U.S. federal government must allow Canadian companies to bid on federal infrastructure projects that fall under the GPA. Despite the rhetoric from the government right now, there will be likely projects that Canadian companies can bid on because they fall under this trade agreement. The problem, as I'm sure others have already told the committee, comes when the federal government transfers infrastructure dollars to the U.S. state or local governments, which are not covered by this agreement on procurement. Since Canada has given away our access to subnational procurement under the GPA, also under the comprehensive, the CPTPP and the CETA, we essentially have no bargaining chips left to play in offering the United States special access to any Canadian projects in return for special access here. In all of those deals, construction projects over $9.1 million cannot have buy local provisions, and the bar for goods and services is lower. It's $366,000 under the CETA, and it's $650,000 under the GPA and the CPTPP. So despite this, I think that there is still a way for the federal government to follow in Biden's lead, and that would be through setting sustainability criteria on inputs such as cement, steel, iron, and aluminum. These criteria in Canada's own infrastructure projects would favor Canada and US producers because our higher domestic environmental standards result in goods that have a much smaller carbon footprint. This would help level the playing field for high quality Canadian and US producers, while also helping Canada and the US meet their climate targets, something that has been recommended before by Blue Green Canada. Social criteria, which could also be allowed, could direct money to businesses, workers, and populations that are currently underserved by the economy, such as First Nations businesses, women-owned businesses, those types of things, allowing these firms to grow in line with Canada's inclusive trade agenda. The Green Economy Network, of which I'm also a part, has called for $80 billion in green investments over 5 years in Canada. And these investments would help us build national transit, both within cities and between cities. They would help us retrofit buildings across Canada and grow our renewable energy sector. This investment would directly create 200,000 jobs each year, and it would allow us to meet our climate targets. This would put us in line with the US. Today, in her first speech as a US trade representative, Ambassador Catherine Tai said that on the environment, the multilateral trading system has no rules to address the corporate incentive to participate in the race to the bottom. She said the view that environmental issues are not an inherent part of trade ignores the reality that the existing rules of globalization incentivize downward pressure on environmental protections. This put countries with higher environmental standards at a competitive disadvantage. So she says environmental rules are not a social issue. This is actually an economic issue. So if we put Canadian versions of Buy American and Buy American conditions, such as sustainability and social criteria, on federal transfers to the provinces and territories, this brings our policy into line with the Biden administration, and it allows us to work together on a North American green jobs and procurement strategy. Biden's administration has signaled interest in reforming the WTO and the GPA at the WTO in order to allow nations to get serious about their commitments to the climate, particularly the Paris Agreement. And it would be very good for Canada's economy, for our job creation and our environment if we joined the United States as global leaders on this front. Finally, I just want to point out that, as the committee knows, Canada has failed to support a motion at the World Trade Organization that would waive restrictions, making sure that vaccines and other medical supplies for the pandemic are affordable for developing nations. US President Biden is under significant pressure right now to change his position on this issue in order to ensure that globally we can vaccinate as many people as quickly as possible and as affordably as possible. Canada should work with our US allies to reverse course at the WTO Council on this and allow a temporary waiver of IP rights for life-saving technologies and medicines. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. McEwen. We will now go directly to questions. So for 6 minutes, Ms. Alsop, please.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you to our witnesses for a very complex issue. And you've given us a lot of information. So I think I need to make sure that we've understood just all the things that you've tried to present to us. So if I understand correctly, the landscape since NAFTA and now CUSMA has significantly changed, that has in part put Canada in a bit of a sticky position. If I could ask Professor Dufour, you stated that now with there not being provisions around federal government procurement in CUSMA, that puts us in a difficult position in terms of getting an exemption to Buy America because we can no longer have a preferential most favored nation type approach. Have I got that right?
Je pense qu'en gros, vous avez...
I think overall you've understood that correctly. What I said was this, and just to summarize, in fact, you cannot have a preferential agreement with the United States. That's the rule. An exemption is possible when you sign a free trade agreement. Previously in NAFTA, there was a clause on government procurement that legislated these bilateral relations. This is no longer possible unless we add a chapter on public procurement, unless we draw up a parallel agreement that would be part of CUSMA. But today, we cannot justify being in a preferential relationship with the United States when it comes to government procurement by them giving us a waiver. If they give us a waiver, they have to grant this to all of the other members of the GPA. And I'm sorry that I didn't say this in French, but the technical vocabulary is more difficult, so it's easier for me to do this in English.
When we negotiated CUSMA, the federal government would have known that the possibility for this executive order around Buy America was a possibility to be put in place once we took out those provisions around federal procurement in CUSMA.
I was not in the negotiating room. I don't know if they had cognizance of this or not. I do hope that this was an impact that they did not account for. the American requirements for the government procurement, their demands, in fact, were too excessive. This would have been a disadvantage for Canada. And again, this was not an easy round of negotiation. I have the sense that for that reason, they've decided to eliminate the government procurement chapter, but perhaps somebody else could answer that, perhaps somebody who was in the bargaining team. But I do hope that they didn't see what occurred coming at all.
So, Professor Hughes, if I could, Canada and others have been given a strong indication of what the intent of the United States is, from Biden's proclamation in 2020 that they wanted to look at how they were going to do things, modifying the rules, and certainly looking at critical supply chains, national security. So they have given us, the United States has put us on notice, telling us the direction that they're looking at going into in terms of having sort of more things at home. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, and I apologize, Madam. Is it Aalslev?
Aalslev, yeah.
Aalslev. I was looking at your April 8th statement where you said the Americans are looking to protect and repatriate a significant amount of jobs in steel and iron and manufacturing to the U.S. Those were your words, and I think those are very apt words, and the signal is very clear. But I would say to everyone on the committee, of course, the target of all that is a more distant trading partner,
absolutely,
not Canada. But as to something Professor Dufour said, I am more optimistic that it would be possible to renegotiate and open Chapter 12. I think it is, Professor Dufour, Chapter 12, which is the government procurement chapter of you. I'm going to call it NAFTA too.
I believe it's Chapter 13.
Chapter 13. Okay. So to take something that Ms. McEwen said, why not propose to the Americans, let's reopen that chapter, but with an environmental focus? Now, it is true, Professor Dufour would say that someone looking out might say, well, you can't do that. You have to renegotiate the whole thing, which was certainly a criticism that was thrown at the United States' limited renegotiation of KORUS, its free trade agreement with South Korea. But that's pretty esoteric. And if there was a genuine effort to bring environmental standards in, I just want to say, last thing I want to say, if there was a genuine effort to make environmental standards as meaningful in the agreement as labor standards, where Canada and the United States and Mexico should be proud, maybe not enough, but proud, that'd be great.
Ms. Aalslev, you have 15 seconds, sorry. And we're a bit tight for time today. I apologize.
All right. Well, I hope I might get another opportunity, but thank you very much to the witnesses.
Thank you very much, Ms. Aalslev. We'll now go to Mr. Housefather for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses. I have to admit that I am always fascinated by the legal jargon that goes with international trade. And as such, I'm going to go to each of you. Professor Hughes, I read your article in The Hill, and I wanted to hear from you on this subject. I'm going to ask you a couple of technical legal questions. Previous witnesses have talked about how this would need to go through Congress. And I understand that Congress would need to appropriate the funds for the projects under Buy America. But what you're essentially, I think, saying is through the executive order, the law with respect to procurement, meaning how the United States would deal with local and state procurement, would not actually need to change. Congress would need to appropriate, but would not necessarily be changing the rules. It would simply be a different application under the executive order of the existing rules by putting more stringent safeguards to allow the central office of the budget to police what states and local governments are doing. Is that essentially correct?
Yes, it's not a matter of Congress appropriating additional money. This is all federal expenditures are subject to these Buy American acts and including money that goes out to state expenditures. So you are correct. It is just a executive tightening.
So the law would actually not be changing. So that's what I guess I was, whatever law exists today, there's more stringent measures under the executive order, but it doesn't require Congress to pass new laws related to procurement. And as such, what is essentially happening is a tightening, not that we're waiting for legislation from Congress on this issue. Is that's essentially correct?
That is correct. And right now we haven't had any tightening, just a lot of analysis, and there may be different levels of tightening.
I understand. Je vais juste tourner maintenant à Maître.
I'll turn it over to Professor Dufour. Thank you very much for your testimony, because you have informed me much better as to the problem before WTO when it comes to this waiver for Canada. However, from what I understand that this exception, a waiver, could also mean a negotiation of a new chapter of WTO, and I believe that Canada and the United States can also do something bilaterally. This exception, therefore, could just consist in negotiating a new chapter. Is that correct? Yes, absolutely. And it's something that I was saying at the end. But do we truly want to reopen this tough negotiation that we saw for CUSMA? Again, that's a political issue, and that's left to be seen. But it would be possible to drop a parallel context, a schedule, a chapter that would apply only to the United States and Canada. But in that case, Mexico would also have to agree, even if this just applied to Canada and the United States. Yes, I understand you 100%. But it's simply because we're using this word exception, but this exception was always an agreement between at least two parties. For what I understand, it's more complicated than that because the American Congress has to approve, I believe, an amendment for CUSM. But again, this was an agreement signed between two countries, and that remains possible, yes.
So, Ms. McEwen, you mentioned something very interesting. Technically, under the WTO, where Canada, you said, unusually relegated our right to retain domestic preference on local and provincial, I guess, contracts where federal monies would go. I know you can withdraw from the agreement. I know the agreement can be amended by two-thirds majority, I believe. Can Canada simply remove our own relinquishment of our rights on that area, or would it need to be an amendment to the agreement itself?
So I have no idea. Actually, I am not a lawyer, but I do think that Canada should engage with the United States in reform of the GPA. I think that they are interested in doing that, and we should be too.
I agree with that. I think that makes complete sense, particularly since our closest ally is now saying and indicating very clearly that's what they want to do. I don't know if Professor Hughes or Professor Dufour, you could answer my question about how Canada could change the way it relinquished that under the WTO.
Professor Dufour is welcome to answer, but my understanding of WTO rules is that Canada can simply withdraw. It is a plurilateral agreement. It is not a multilateral agreement.
Oh no, but not withdraw from the WTO.
Just withdraw from the GPA. It's a plurilateral agreement, meaning that if it's plurilateral, you can leave it.
But how can we amend what we've given up in terms of procurement in the schedule where we've set that subnational governments are subject to it? Can we withdraw? That's
actually my question. Yeah.
Professor Dufour might have an opinion. My view would be you should be brave and withdraw and go back in.
Et Maître Dufour, est-ce que vous avez une réponse un peu plus facile que ça?
Mr. Fur, perhaps you have an easier answer. It is always possible to renegotiate the commitments that we made at the WTA, whether this be a bilateral, multilateral agreement, except when you renegotiate the member states, because belonging to WTO is a privilege. It's a select club. And it is understood at WTO that when you withdraw a privilege from our trade partners, we need to negotiate with them and we need to compensate them for this because of the fact that we are changing our commitments or withdrawing if this costs them any money. It's possible, but it's not simple.
Arthur, thank you very much. Sorry about that. Monsieur Savard-Tremblay, vous avez 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay, I didn't quite understand whether you were asking me to step in. 6 minutes. You have 6 minutes. Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. And I'd like to welcome our colleagues. I'd also like to welcome the witnesses. Thank you for your presentation. I'd like to turn to Ms. Dufour. Thank you very much for your presentation. You have opened up the door during your presentation to develop a few points that you explained you didn't have time to cover during this question period. I'd like to give you an opportunity to cover them. You said that this could not be a sectoral agreement, that it must be part of a free trade agreement. But as you so correctly raised, this could be politically difficult to renegotiate after so much time has already been spent on negotiation. But my first question is this. What is a free trade agreement if it isn't a set of various sectoral agreements? That's an excellent question. I knew that you would ask me that question, given the last sessions that you've had. So I knew that you would be asking the question. Well, it's simple. A free trade agreement can constitute an exception to the general principles of an international trade only if it covers a few or responds to a number of criteria for the substance and the form. So as to the substance, first and foremost, you have to negotiate a free trade agreement which frees up most of the trade between states. That is what this means, and this was never defined at WTA's case law, but it means that about 90% of the trade is what it constitutes, which means that you cannot have a free trade agreement that would free up aluminum, steel, or sugar, etc., or bananas. We've seen those kinds of examples in the past at WTA. So you could not sign a sectoral agreement only on public procurement markets. Only if you were going to open up the question on renegotiating government procurement would that be possible within our current free trade agreement, that is CUSMA. So again, it always has to be under that same heading. That is, you're going to add sectors, such as steel, for instance. But I'm pleased to see that you are following our work, and it means that we're doing this for the right reasons. Now, I'd like to ask this, and you've mentioned a number of different scenarios. So in terms of the exchange of letters, is that a possibility to do this? Certainly. Through an exchange of letters, it is possible that you either add a treaty or amend a treaty. That's fine. So that could be a possible path when it comes to government procurement. Yes, absolutely. These are letters that are annexed to a treaty. So that would be a possibility. So what approach would you recommend? Earlier, you mentioned that you were not at the negotiating table, and you no doubt wouldn't be there if there were new negotiations. But I'd like to, if I may, to ask you this question. What approach should we put in place according to you? Do you believe that we should perhaps aim for a global exemption or on the greenest product? We know that there are a number of products on which we will be able to come out ahead. For example, our aluminum, which is much cleaner than the aluminum from Asia, for instance. Would that be a possible approach as far as you're concerned? Well, you have to be very careful when you speak about public procurement and environmental criteria. I have to admit that that is really one of my battles that I'm waging currently. I'm fighting on this with the government of Quebec so that you impose this on public procurement, that we have social environmental criteria that are imposed on them. But for the time being, in Quebec and in Canada, in a number of provinces, absolutely nothing compels public procurement players to respect environmental criteria. Nothing incentivize them. Nothing makes their lives easier to do this. Whereas in the United States, it's been some 20, 25 years that in a number of states, in Maine, Vermont, California, and New York, there is the imposition of these environmental criteria in public procurement. So if we want to play that game, that is possible, and I certainly hope we will play. It's necessary. But if we want to play that game, it's vital that the Canadian government imposes on its public procurement suppliers to include these environmental and social criteria in public procurement. It's necessary, and we have to prepare industry. You've mentioned aluminum. Certainly, our aluminum is greener, but we have many producers who produce green products, and who are, for the time, not even able to prove that these are green products. They've never had to do it because this wasn't required under the bidding process. So the government really has to do its homework. That is, both federal and provincial governments have to do their homework to structure our markets, our green markets, to make sure that we become more competitive on foreign markets. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think we have to be careful here because we actually are not doing our homework when it comes to sustainable government procurement. Yes, very good. I see that the chair is opening up the mic, so I don't have time to ask any more questions. That'll be for the next round of questions.
Merci, Monsieur Savard-Tremblay. Merci, you're very observant. And to the final question for this round, we'll go to Mr. Blakey for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for being here this evening or afternoon, wherever you happen to be across the continent. I just wanted to follow up a little bit more on the theme of how we could use environmental and social criteria as a means not only to achieve important domestic goals, but also as a means to try and access or provide access for Canadian companies to some of the work at the not just at the federal but at the state level in the United States if we have common cause around. And I think that's one of the opportunities, as some of our witnesses have pointed out, of the new administration in the United States is an opportunity to have more common cause around environmental and social goals. So what are some of the ways that we might be able to mobilize those common goals in order to secure access to procurement projects in the United States under the spending that is, that we're told is coming? And so I wonder, I know Ms. McEwen, you were speaking a little bit to that on the social side. I'm wondering, there's a lot of talk in Ottawa and elsewhere about the virtue of community benefit agreements for public procurement. I wonder if that's one of the tools that might be used in order to define those social goods and how projects would achieve them. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to that.
Absolutely. Community benefit agreements they take a little bit longer to get set up, but they generally have a number of benefits in that the investment is sure to meet the needs of the community because the community is involved in planning it. And you can often actually more concretely target these underserved groups that we have elements for in the trade agreement. It's part of our inclusive trade agenda is to make sure that we're reaching Indigenous-owned businesses or businesses owned by women, but this is actually a concrete way to make sure that a certain amount of the project is reserved for these types of investments, and to make sure that there's training and those types of social that we call social, but really they are economic investments.
Great. And on the environmental question, I wonder if our other witnesses might like to speak to how Canada might both structure some of its own public infrastructure projects in order to, support certain environmental outcomes, but also how we might use our willingness to do that in negotiations with the United States government around, trying to ensure that Canadian firms along these environmental lines might be able to access American public projects and kind of create a reciprocal relationship there without violating any of the current strictures around preferential procurement. Mr. Hughes, I wonder if we might start with you and then give my remaining time to Professor Dufour.
Sure. As a short answer, I think that there's been very little discussion in the United States on the possible infrastructure package as to environmental protection and favorable procurement for environmentally protective businesses and production methods. I certainly personally would like to see that. Of course, the easiest way to deal with the procurement agreement, the WTO procurement agreement, is to make as many of your contracts as possible fall under the threshold. That's a limited strategy, but it is a strategy. But one also has to remember that we are in a period where all of these things are under discussion. And I would agree with, I think, the spirit of many of the other witnesses and many of the members, in that now is an opportunity for like-minded countries to get together, even in an alternative forum, not necessarily at the WTO, perhaps at the OECD, or perhaps in informal groups, and saying, this is how we would like to reimagine some of these agreements, particularly including government procurements.
Okay. Thank you. Madame Dufour, est-ce que vous avez des...
Ms. Dufour, any thoughts that you would like to share with us on this topic?
Excusez-moi.
Oh, I'm sorry. It apparently cut off, so perhaps I did not hear this again. Your question was how in Canada we could structure the environment to ensure that our public procurement markets are more green. Is that correct? Yes. As well, how do we use this will? Do we have the same will as in the United States to ensure that Canadian firms would gain access to the major infrastructure projects that the Biden administration is putting in place? Well, very quickly, to ensure that public procurement becomes greener, that's very easy. Studies worldwide have shown that it doesn't come from the bottom, but rather from the top. The government must impose this on public procurement players to add these criteria in their products, in their projects. This could be done progressively in a flexible fashion. You could have short, medium, and long-term objectives. We don't want everything to become green overnight, but the government has to begin by compelling its own buyers, its vendors, to respect environmental criteria. When you look at the government procurement market right now, there are many bids that have no single sustainable development criterion attached to them, and that's not normal when you look at the situation in Europe, in Japan, in Tunisia, etc. So it has to be forced. We need to develop a culture in our companies, because the companies, well, we all know how they work, how small, medium-sized companies work. It's from one day to the next. And if you do not force them to change their ways of doing things, they won't do it. It's not because they don't want to. It's because they live in the present. But you have to change their culture to make sure they change their way of doing business. And those who already have green goods, that they start documenting this. Because, let's say, I do this, I work with the Canadian Aluminum Association of Canada, I work with green products producers. They don't always have in hand the data to demonstrate that they are greener than others. Aluminum really is an exception. They're far ahead of the game compared to many other companies. But we have to provide them with tools as well. And that's the most important point, Mr. Chair. You have to give them with the proper tools so that this becomes easy.
Much. Thank you, Mr. Blicky. We will go now to the second round to Mr. Strahl for 5 minutes, please.
Actually, I think Mr. Strahl has graciously given me his time.
Sorry.
Mr. Chair.
Sorry, Ms. Alislav. You go ahead for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Professor Hughes, you put it into context that the United States has been sort of clear in recent memory in terms of identifying where they're going. And one of the areas has been around the challenges with the global economic balance of power, the impacts of the playing field and the rules around global trade, not the least of which is the rules at the WTO. And they have made motions that they want to amend some of those. Is that a fair statement?
That is a fair statement. The United States has become increasingly frustrated with some of the operations of the WTO. That is a fair statement. And just let me say, and I thank you for calling on me again, because I spoke so long last time, I thought you never would. But those who say, the WTO is dead because the appellate process is suspended right now, I don't think that's fair either, right? We've really just reverted to the GATT system. The GATT system was a very constructive system for resolving trade disputes, but I'm optimistic, but we will go through a period of reassessment, I think all of us together.
And one of those is around the domestic procurement and how we would use domestic money for our own industries and national security elements, correct?
Absolutely. And I think to riff off something Ms. McEwen would say, those of us who believe in international trade, many of us also believe that localization is very important, and North American trade is more important than distant trade. And so we should be fostering that.
So fair enough. So possibly we might have an option to open Chapter 13 of CUSMA, or perhaps we can look at the possibility of WTO rules being changed. But as you've said, trade never operates in isolation, and some of the American policies are not directed necessarily at Canada, but the United States has been clear that there are some other aspects sort of outside of trade, from environment to security to defense, that they would like perhaps Canada's position to change, and that also might be a leverage point for our relationship on trade. Is that how you're seeing it as well?
Yes, but I think that the commonality of Canada and U.S.'s positions in multilateral fora is long and documented. I'm just reading a book on the development of GATT, and of all the members of the Commonwealth at the time of the development of GATT, it was Canada and the United States trying to convince all the other members of the Commonwealth to come along.
So should Canada be looking at reviewing our position with respect to WTO, with respect to some of the North American NORAD defense principles, with respect to, say, our relationship with some other perhaps not like-minded countries, if we are hoping to reinvigorate and bolster our relationship with the United States?
Well, I think that we need to find the common issues more than trade. We need to find the common things we care about: democracy and the environment and labor protection and human rights. And let me just say, just as 22nd, that everyone needs to understand that after World War II, the trade system threw all those things out in order to try to get the world economy started again. We're reaching a point now where it's time to bring those back in and say those count.
A balance between world trade and domestic national security capability, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And then, Ms. McEwen, if I might, your organization published in February 21st, 2020, a document making some recommendations around what information Canadians should have around economic impact. And you recommended that economic impact assessments should be mandatory within the parliamentary process. And I'm wondering if you still feel that way, and if understanding what the economic impact of a Buy America or exclusion from a Buy America process would help in terms of Canada's positioning on this topic.
Very quick answer, please.
Sure. I definitely think more transparency, more information, more consultation is always better. So, yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Aalslev. And we'll now go to Mr. McKay for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I wanted to narrow the focus here and get the best advice we have from three very able people. This is a $2.3 trillion proposal by the President, roughly the size of Canada's entire economy. It's quite clear that if you look through the various elements in the bill, a lot of it has got nothing to do with Buy America or Buy American, or anything to do with any difficulties that we might have in the trade relationship. And it's also clear that that we haven't had a heck of a lot of really good access to the American economy, even at the best of times, something in the order of about $600 million, according to an answer we received from the trade folks. So the real question here is how to focus, and what is your best advice to the government of Canada in terms of what it should focus, assuming this bill goes through. It won't go through at 2.3 trillion, but it'll go through certainly north of 1.5 trillion. And so the question really from that I have is, What is the area of focus, the areas that are most problematic, where the Government of Canada's arguments are strongest, and what are the elements that, and I'm not sure who said it, are legally questionable? Now, if I just go from Mr. Hughes through to the other two witnesses and get answers to those questions, if I may, please.
So, quick answer, I have not studied the initial administration proposal on the infrastructure bill. I don't know what the $600 million statistic, Mr. McKay, you cited is. I will tell you that Biden administration officials have told me that in terms of government procurement access, their estimates are that Canadian firms have a openness to address about $300 billion worth of U.S. federal procurement versus U.S. entities having about $10 billion available on the Canadian side to bid for. So I am conscious that folks in the government are in Washington are aware of that differential, but I would recommend my advice, if I were giving advice, was sit down carefully with Washington and figure out where, because right now Washington is very, very concerned about supply chain issues, and figure out where are the holes in the North American supply chain, and let's jointly fill those. And if that means a factory here that's refurbished and a factory there that's refurbished, and we jointly do something here, great. Because, 20 seconds more, in testimony before this committee, you've been talking repeatedly about Ontario automobile plants being suspended because of lack of semiconductors, but the same thing's happening in the United States side. So we have this common problem.
Amen, brother. Professor DeFuhr.
Je suis tout à fait d'accord.
I entirely agree with what Professor Hughes just said. It is absolutely vital that the Canadian government, after a detailed analysis of the measures as announced, and which will take some time, that it then begins discussions in order to reassess the reintegration, to reaffirm the integration of our value chains. It has to be repeated continuously, but it is not true that today the Americans can close their territory off and begin that they'll become independent because our value chains are far too integrated. Mr. Hughes spoke about products that cross our borders for auto parts, and they constantly cross the border. But unfortunately, this is not a satisfactory solution. That is to discuss post-analysis, because it gives rise to a lot of unpredictability, and that is the worst enemy of trade. But I don't have a better solution than that to present.
Ms. McKeown, I hate to do this again, but just a short answer.
Thank you. I would agree with the supply chains, but I think that what we need to do as a government is prepare our industry to be able to meet those types of sustainability criteria, to be able to help them show where they have clean energy supply chains, where they have where they're using Canadian steel or Canadian aluminum that has a much lower footprint, and we can easily prove that. So those are the types of things that will help them be competitive in the market globally and within the United States, regardless of Buy American policies.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. McKay. We will now go to Monsieur Savard-Tremblay. Vous avez 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Yes.
You have 2.5 minutes. Thank you. Let me turn it back to Ms. Dufour to take off where we left earlier. You already described the executive order because I follow what you do, and you say that it's a kind of fusion of everything that has been done to date. There is policy, there are different measures, etc. So at the end of the day, they're officializing this under a single chapter. But what about the Small Business Act? Is that part of it? Of course, I'm speaking about this American legislation, which in public procurement provides for a minimum of content from SMEs. And how does this play out with respect to the overall picture that you've drawn up for us? Well, you're correct to mention this measure. which might impact Canadian companies. You're speaking about the measure which provides that all of the markets under $250,000 must be given, all of those contracts must be given to small U.S. SMEs, and Canadian firms, therefore, are excluded from these. But there is the option for American firms, and again, it's not perfect, but to come together as in a co-venture, a joint venture with a Canadian company, or to at least contract out jointly with Canada. So there is that option up to 50% of the contract value. So an American company can co-contract with a Canadian company. It is not perfect, but again, it's a further limit that the Americans have enshrined in their commitments with respect to international law and economic law. They have the right to do this. After that, it's up to us to negotiate to gain preferential access to their markets. The GPA rules of the WTA apply to 48 states. If we want to be favored, we have to go negotiate with them. So given the minimal content as to contracts granted to SMEs, it's the same rules that apply. That is the advantage granted to one must also be granted to others. And that is, yes, that's the most favored nation rule. Any directive, any privilege, any policy, even though it is not mandatory, that would favor Canada has to be extended to all of the other states unless this is enshrined in a free trade agreement that has been duly and properly signed. Thank you very much, Mr. Savard-Tremblay.
And now we will go to Mr. Blakey for the final question for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I think I'm going to start with Professor Hughes because I just want to explore a little bit more the kinds of supply chain coordination that you're talking about, or the potential for it between Canada and the United States. And I'm wondering how that interacts with the prohibition on sector bargaining, like what those kinds of agreements on supply management supply chain coordination might look like without engaging in any kind of sectoral agreements that would be prohibited under the World Trade Organization rules.
I'm happy to answer that. So sectoral agreements that Professor Dufour was discussing is she was talking about, I believe, GATT Article 24, which means that if you have a preferential trade arrangement, including a free trade area, you cannot do it by sector. That has nothing to do with collaborative efforts on developing a semiconductor factory, or collaborative efforts in building a pipeline, or collaborative efforts in building a dam for generating electricity. So my analysis would be that's not an issue. We don't need to worry about that. Okay. And I see Professor Dufour shaking her head yes.
Professor Dufour, est-ce que vous voulez ajouter?
Would you like to add something to that statement, Professor Dufour? Sorry? I think when you speak in French, I cannot really hear you. But I completely concur. These are agreements that are not under the treaty. If it's an agreement, for example, to carry out a given project.
Relationship look like they're between governments who are identifying a need in private markets and the private actors within those industries? Like, to what extent are we talking about? It's not something I'm typically averse to, and that New Democrats are typically averse to. But I mean, when we talk about that kind of coordination within a sector, what kind of public involvement are we talking about?
Short answer, please.
My short answer to you would be, I believe you in the past have tried to rehabilitate the word industrial policy, and I think that going forward, the word industrial policy is not a dirty word.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blakey. Really appreciate the comment. I want to really sincerely thank all the witnesses for taking the time to enlighten us and giving your perspectives. I think this has been an excellent committee. So thank you very much to all of you. Wishing you all a happy weekend. And we will suspend now for a few minutes, or for a few sad moments, just to allow the other witnesses to come in. So again, thank you to all the witnesses.
Thank you.
Ça fait plaisir.
I would like to now welcome the panelists to the committee from the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, Mr. Matthew Wilson, Senior Vice President, Policy and Government Relations. From the Canadian Steel Producers Association, Catherine Cobden, President and Chief Executive Officer. And from the Cement Association of Canada, Michael McSweeney, President and Chief Executive Officer. Mr. Wilson, I will open the floor to you for 5 minutes for your opening comments, please.
Good evening, and thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in today's discussion. It is my pleasure to be here on behalf of our association's 2,500 direct members and 90,000 manufacturers and exporters across the country to discuss Buy America policies. My comments today will be to aim to reinforce CME's longstanding ask that governments fight Buy America policies and push for the implementation of Buy Can-Am policies instead. It goes without saying that the work of the special committee is timely and is of great importance to Canadian manufacturers, not just on today's subject of Buy America, but on all aspects concerning our special relationship with the United States. Canada's trade partnership with the U.S. is a core component of our economies and the very lifeblood of manufacturing. Goods manufactured in Canada or the U.S. can cross our shared borders several times during the production process. The majority of trade between our countries are subcomponents that go into making finished goods. As a result, Canadian Americans don't simply trade with one another. From steel and cars to computers and robots to chemicals to medical devices, we make goods together and we compete with the world together. In many sectors and with many goods, there is no distinction made between Canadian or American goods. This is the way our trade rules have been developed over decades. By American-style policies, those policies that aim to create distinction between locally produced and foreign-produced goods for government contracts make huge amounts of political and practical sense. The theory being that if government is spending taxpayer dollars on goods, those goods should stay within the local economy. In addition, some sectors, procurement can significantly strengthen developed essential industries. And politically, the narrative is that these policies are used to protect local jobs and industry against bad, and in some cases, illegal activities from foreign competition. In general, CME agrees with the theory of this approach and have long argued that Canadian government should place a higher priority on domestic sourcing of goods through procurement policies. However, not in the manner that Buy America policies have been implemented historically. Rather, we believe that you can take into consideration the economic upside of procurement while recognizing and supporting regional supply chains and ensuring taxpayers get good value for their money. The challenge with Buy America as currently implemented is it tends to be a blunt instrument that doesn't differentiate between integrated supply chains and imported to finished goods, therefore undermining regional supply chains. Here's an example. During the implementation of the American Recovery Reinvestment Act in 2008-2009, the U.S. implemented a range of Buy America policies. A large, well-known U.S. manufacturer bid on a contract to supply water pumps as part of municipal infrastructure projects. That company's bid was rejected. Why? Well, because one simple component, not the finished product, was manufactured at a plant in Oakville, Ontario. This has not only hurt their Canadian operations, but the U.S. company operations as well. CME has worked in this file with our member companies for a long time. We have researched, analyzed surveys, and written papers on the subject. We have worked with governments on solutions and options, including through the ARA and more recently through the renegotiation of NAFTA. Based on our work, there are generally three options that CME believes are most important in Canada's approach to Buy America policies. First, push for Buy Can-Am procurement policies in the U.S. and implement similar measures here. Second, reciprocity is a must is a must and must be fundamental principle in any trading relationship, including that with the United States. And Canada must not be afraid of implementing retaliatory measures. Third, Canada and the United States should build from existing areas of strategic procurement where domestic production capabilities are needed, especially as it relates to COVID-19 recovery and future preparedness. In fact, these approaches are all used today in various ways, and they work. The Gordie Howe Bridge that will connect Ontario to Michigan uses the Buy Can-Am procurement model. The province of Ontario implemented a reciprocal procurement market access provision when faced with the U.S. states threatening to block sales of Ontario-made goods into their markets, and those states backed down. Canada itself implemented similar provisions last year on steel and aluminum tariffs, and we have seen for over 50 years a joint defense procurement agreement that supports integrated production and procurement in defense industries. Given the current executive order on expanding Buy America policies and the current administration's historical connection to using these policies, CME believes it is essential for the Canadian government to aggressively push for a bilateral and permanent Buy Can-Am deal. CME understands that this ask comes with significant challenges, but believes the timing is right. The new administration is much more aligned to international cooperation and in general with Canadian views on politics and policies. We are in the process of implementing a new free trade deal that is lacking a modernized procurement chapter, and governments on both sides of the border are implementing economic recovery packages that will heavily feature procurement spending as a key tool in that recovery. Thank you again for inviting me to discuss this. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson. We'll now go to Ms. Cobden for 5 minutes, please.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My name is Catherine Cobden. I am the President and CEO of the Canadian Steel Producers Association, and I really thank you for the opportunity to appear here today to share the perspective of the domestic steel industry on the important economic relationship between Canada and the United States as you deliberate on Buy America and the American Jobs Plan. Our member companies produce approximately 15 million tons of steel and products annually and support about 123,000 direct and indirect jobs in over 5 provinces. Our industry plays a strategically important role in the economy as a critical supplier to the North American automotive, energy, construction, and manufacturing sectors. We send approximately 40% of our total production to the United States every year, and we meet about 5% of their market needs. In turn, we are a very important customer to them, with U.S. steel making up about 25% of all steel used in Canada. We also benefit from strong and integrated supply chains and markets, and indeed, steel may pass over the border multiple times as it is transformed into specific products required by the marketplace. Well, we've had our share of challenges in Canada and U.S. steel trade over the last years. We remain steadfast in our view that we're stronger together than divided. We welcome the renewed collaboration agenda that we have been hearing out of the different bilateral meetings our government has been holding with the United States. Undoubtedly, there are challenges ahead. However, we believe it's crucial to take hold of the opportunity of this goodwill to ensure we maintain and even strengthen access to the United States. While Buy America's damage has been done to steel in previous versions of that program, we're concerned about how things may play out given changes proposed in the new Made in America economic plan and the potential implications to its American Jobs Plan. Our real-life experience is that exclusions or not, customers are driven away from using Canadian steel due to market chill created by these policies, and very practical considerations, such as things like needing to carry different inventories, sort of Buy America inventories and non-Buy America inventories. We certainly appreciate efforts and thoughts around, seeking exclusions, but we are concerned that this would not be at all a sufficient approach in terms of this challenge. We would suggest a broad approach in our response to the Buy America plan and built upon this collaboration of key priorities and the ability to demonstrate our commitment to do similar efforts in Canada. So we have 4 specific suggestions for you for your consideration. Number 1, promote Canada as a reliable supplier of green materials in support of the U.S. climate objectives and Build Back Better with their infrastructure programs. The U.S. does not have sufficient supply of their own domestic steel, so they will need trading partners that share common vision and objectives on many fronts. On climate, in particular, I'm proud to say that the Canadian steel producers are amongst the greenest in the world. A recent global benchmarking study reports that Canadian steel is number 1 and number 2 in the world, depending on production methodology, for the lowest carbon intensity when compared to other major steel jurisdictions around the world. Number 2, demonstrate our commitment to green procurement in our own infrastructure program. This is an important area that continues to be overlooked in Canada's climate and net zero plans. Canada's steel sector, we have the green credentials, and I know other sectors do as well, to support this important objective. And we feel it is a bit of a credibility issue to expect this within a U.S. infrastructure program while not pursuing this explicitly in Canada. Number 3, position Canada as an equal partner with the United States in our fight against unfair steel traders through explicit changes to our trade remedy system. Canadian and U.S. steel industries share a deep concern with the growing and significant global overcapacity from China, Iran, Turkey, and other areas in the ASEAN region. For example, the U.S. has made significant changes to their trade monitoring and enforcement system to catch and penalize unfair traders, and we simply must keep pace. CSPA members have made a range of recommended changes, including identifying where steel is melted and poured, improving our monitoring system at the border, and addressing the pressing need for an anti-circumvention framework similar to the United States. And our final suggestion is to continue to support the full implementation of CUSMA. This agreement has been very good for the steel industry. It recognizes the deep integration of our economies and strengthens the competitiveness of the North American industry and our supply chains. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to provide these comments.
Thank you, Ms. Cobden. We will now go to Mr. McSweeney for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair and committee members, for inviting me to speak here tonight. As I said earlier, my name is Michael McSweeney, and I'm President and CEO of the Cement Association of Canada. We represent 5 cement companies with cement manufacturing facilities across Canada. Our members are Ashgrove, Federal White, Lafarge, Lehigh Hansen, St. Mary's Cement. Our mission is to promote and advocate the environmental and economic and social benefits of building with cement and concrete. Our industry constitutes the foundation, literally the foundation of economic growth and infrastructure. Virtually all construction across Canada, whether above ground or below ground, needs concrete. Twice as much concrete as any other building material combined is used. Behind water, concrete is the second most consumed commodity. For every woman, man, and child globally, 3 tons of concrete are consumed each and every year. And throughout COVID, our industry was recognized as essential as provincial officials strive to maintain the construction of infrastructure like hospitals, schools, wastewater treatment facilities, and public transportation networks. Over the past 5 years, Canada's economy has used approximately 45 million tons of cement. And in the next 5 years, it's forecasted that Canada will consume 55 million tons of cement. That will yield 400 million tons of concrete, enough to fill 24 million concrete trucks. And parked bumper to bumper, those trucks would circle the globe 4.5 times. In addition to concrete and cement being indispensable, we are truly the cornerstone of Canada's economy. We have concrete plants right across Canada and in every political riding. 1,000 ready-mix concrete plants, 35 concrete pipe plants, 15 cement plants, 56 precast plants, 12 insulated concrete form plants, and 35 concrete block plants. Combined cement and concrete operations generate over $76 billion in annual economic activity, and we employ over 158,000 Canadians. The economic impact of our industry cannot be underestimated, particularly given the role Canadian cement plays as a strategic export to the United States. It might come as a surprise, but 40% of all of Canada's cement is exported to the US, across the Great Lakes, down the Atlantic seaboard, and down the Pacific Northwest coast. All of this brings me to today's topic: Buy America, and Made in America. The US and Canada have long maintained a mutually beneficial tariff-free relationship when it comes to trading in cement. The US cannot produce enough cement domestically to meet its demand. To address this gap, the US imports over 16 million tons of cement annually, with 35% of that, almost 6 million tons, coming from Canada. Our two markets are completely integrated, allowing cement to move back and forth across the border to reach key markets across the US. Restrictions to this trade flow in the form of Buy America, Buy American policies risk damaging that long-standing integrated supply chain. So with 40% of Canadian cement exported each year, a failure to exempt Canada from rising trade protectionism will result in increased costs and delayed infrastructure projects for the US, as well as a loss of Canadian jobs here in Canada. This would also work against the US's Buy Clean agenda. If the US displaces Canada's imports with imports from Asia and Eastern Europe, we'll see an increased GHG emission profile of approximately 25% from transportation of cement alone. Given that cement is part of the integrated Canada-US market, optimizing manufacturing logistics and regional demand, Canadian exports to the US will reduce shipping costs as well as greenhouse gas emissions. Canada produces one of the lowest carbon emission cements globally and continues to pursue deeper emission reductions through many new innovations. In Canada, the Canadian cement industry, I might add, can easily reduce 5 to 6 megatons of GHGs over the next 5 years. So it's important that Canada makes the case to the Biden administration to issue a waiver for Canadian cements as it develops its Buy America, Buy American plan. Canadian officials must highlight the mutually economic benefits of maintaining a free flow of trade and the importance of available and increasingly lower carbon cement to buy clean and build back better agendas in both Canada and the United States. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. McSweeney. We will now go to questions. For the first round will be Mr. Lewis for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, witnesses. Certainly incredibly awesome testimony. Certainly appreciate it. And I was so happy that all three of you brought up the border issue. And that's where my questions will be geared to tonight. I'd like to start through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Wilson. I spoke yesterday, Mr. Wilson, to the union president of the CBSA in Windsor, busiest international border in all of North America. And he represents 540 union employees, 300 frontline, 240 are support services. And they don't have vaccines in their arms. Sarnia has vaccines in their arms. Their employees do, Norfolk do, and Windsor doesn't. So my question for you, sir, the first question is this. If in the event that, and I really hope it doesn't, but in the event that our CBSA officers, our frontline officers were to be infected with COVID-19 and had to shut the border down, what would that do to manufacturing industry?
Well, it would very quickly stop most production in most sectors. Like that, to be very blunt, Mr. Lewis, if stuff can't move back and forth across the border and the manufacturing sector can't operate, there's almost no part of the supply chain that wouldn't link either going out or coming into the U.S. So, and that border crossing is essential. Not, a lot of it gets talked about in terms of automotive, but actually the second largest volume that goes across the border is foodstuffs. And so not only would it impact manufacturing, it would impact what you and I eat on a daily basis and what we'd be able to buy from grocery stores. So the impact wouldn't just be on the manufacturing sector. It would be pretty big, pretty wide, pretty quickly. And yes, you could reroute around and go through, say, the Niagara Frontier or through Sarnia, as you mentioned, but not very convenient. But it can be worked around. But I just say, look, we've been advocating for a long time for better testing, better vaccines for all essential workers, and that includes our border guards. Certainly we're coming at it from a manufacturing perspective, but that's a really key part. They're just as important as the truck drivers themselves that would be moving the goods back and forth. So yeah, fundamentally important that gets taken care of.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson, and through you, Mr. Chair, back to Mr. Wilson again. So, Mr. Wilson, I have been speaking very, very closely, and this is much more. This is a Canadian aspect. It's not about my backyard of Essex and Windsor, although it's very near and dear to my heart. Essex and Windsor, probably some of the greatest advanced manufacturing assembly that happens across our incredible country called Canada. But I do realize it's not only more countrywide; it's global. right? And so, sir, I believe you had mentioned in your opening statements there's some 90,000 exporters. That one really caught my attention, something crazy. But I will also suggest, sir, that I do know there's a major issue with when we talk about commerce, we're talking about many people think about commerce as a good, as a piece of paper, as a carrot, but people are commerce. And I've been speaking to so many people, both sides of the border, Canada, U.S. sides, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Mexico. And I know that that a lot of the people that you represent, sir, bring in stacks of paper this thick to go across the border to show the CBSA officers, the border guards on the U.S. side, that you indeed are essential service, that they are essential service. Would it be beneficial to the exporters, to our manufacturing, advanced manufacturing assembly? And this question, quite frankly, did go all over witnesses. If we had one page that showed that people were vaccinated within the last 2 hours and they are essential service, and they show it to the border guard to not tie up our border guards, to not tie up commerce. Does that make sense? I'm trying to get creative here so we can move past this and actually have the discussion to open up our economy.
Yeah, very quickly, I think anything you can do to simplify it and make it more consistent. The problem, companies can do paperwork. They may not like it. Small companies have a hard time with it, but they can deal with it. What they can't deal with is uncertainty. And that's really what we're into a situation with now with most of the movement of people. I think you captured it very well in terms of it's not just about the goods, it's about the people and ideas that go back and forth, and they're essential for making sure manufacturing works. So anything that we can do to make it consistent, simplify it, we'd be all in favor of. So I'm not exactly sure, one form versus 5 forms, that can be up for negotiation. It's just got to be consistent between border crossings every time of day, between border guards. It shouldn't matter when someone shows up or where they show up, but the rules need to be applied the same.
Thank you, Ms. Rosa. Mr. Chair, how much time left, sir?
Less than 1 minute, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Last question will go to Ms. Cobden, with the steel industry then. So we have the Gordie Howe Bridge slowly being built. And, I have a monstrous steel industry right here, literally about 10 kilometers from me, one of the largest steel industries that go back and forth. And so my question for you is, what can we do? What can we do as a committee to really promote to promote this from our side to the United States, to not bring in Chinese, not to bring in Turkish steel, to use our own steel?
Yeah, really appreciate that question, Mr. Lewis. Thank you very much. I mean, trying to point that out in my remarks, I think there is absolutely a need to do more to promote the use of both Canadian and American on their side, steel. And I'm not saying that all importers are unfairly traded, but we are at very high risk. We are a very intriguing market for unfair traded importers. And when they pour into our market, they really disturb it. So, whatever we can do to we're trying to give you some sense of our advantages. We're very green. We obviously create high employment in the area, and I think we have good labor practices that would also appeal to the United States. I think there's lots of places where we're commonly aligned, and so continuing to pursue that. But also, don't forget the trade remedies that I've mentioned. We must do more at our border to prevent those importers, those unfair traders, man, they're very sophisticated in how they figure out ways around the tariffs that are in place.
Thank you, Ms. Cobden.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. And we'll now go to Mr. Sarai for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank my colleague, Mr. Lewis, who's highlighted that although the study is more about Buy America and those trade policies, but the vaccination issues, and I hope somebody from Premier Ford's cabinet or department is listening to this to make sure that his border crossing is vaccinated, and while others are and his aren't, I think that's a problem the Premier of Ontario and the Health Authority of Ontario needs to take very seriously. And well, we should point that to maybe the health committee to facilitate that. In this, I want to thank, first of all, Mr. Wilson, Ms. Cobden, and Mr. McSweeney on your testimony. It's very important. You all have emphasized what we all see every day of goods going back and forth. I have AI Industries in my riding, which fabricates steel, and I remember when the tariffs were put on, we had interesting dilemmas happening where their steel was being tariffed by the U.S., saying it's unsafe. On the same side, we were countervailing and hitting steel where certain parts were coming from the U.S. So the schools being built in Seattle, some of the steel's coming from the U.S., some is coming from Quebec, some is made and fabricated here in British Columbia and then assembled down in Seattle. So you can see the intricacies of the steel going back and forth and parts going back and forth. So that has really shown it. And Mr. McSweeney, what you've talked about in terms of concrete, we see it every day. Lafarge and others that are shipping cement going back and forth, and some products made on the other side of the border that come over this way. So I think it's almost impossible to separate that type of ingredient in it. What I would like to know, and anyone feel free to elaborate on this, if they were to effectively stop Canadian products from being able to be bought in procurement of the U.S. federal plan, what is the dollar value that would be at risk that falls below the 50% American input threshold? So what would we be at risk if, does anyone have an idea of that? Maybe Mr. Wilson, perhaps you may elaborate as you're kind of the collective on this. I've been trying to get this from many industries and I haven't got that number.
Oh, yeah, I honestly, here's the problem. So I think the last panel, someone mentioned $600 billion in procurement markets in the United States. It's a huge number. We only make about that much in manufactured goods in Canada on an annualized basis across all industries. So it's a massive number. I don't want to put an exact dollar number on it. What I will say is whatever you think it is, it's going to be bigger. And the reason why I say that is because economists will come out and they'll study and say in this sector, in this sector, in this sector, this will be what the impact is. And they'll give you a nice round number. Maybe it's $100 billion, maybe it's $50 billion. I don't know. What you can never calculate is a chilling effect on everything else that you don't ever see. And so what we actually end up seeing is when the government starts promoting Buy American policies as a way to mostly be against dumped stuff coming in from offshore, and they almost always say, oh, we don't mean Canada, it spills over into every procurement decision that any company makes, any government makes on anything. So you can have all the benchmarks in the world, 50%, $50,000, $2 million, whatever number you want to throw out there is completely irrelevant, because what ends up happening at the end of the day, it spills over into every single transaction that takes place in every single sector, both in the public sector and in the private sector. And there are no easy solutions. We've even had member companies of ours who are involved in this buy American companies to get around Buy American restrictions, only to be told they weren't, and continue to manufacture the goods in the United States to supply U.S. companies. Government contracts, and they were told they weren't allowed to bid on American contracts because they weren't an American company.
I think it would be fair to say, sir, that while it's hard to put an exact cost on it, it would be billions and billions of dollars between steel and cement for sure. But it's jobs, it's union jobs.
So
it's food on people's table.
I completely agree. And that's why I think it's very important to remind the Americans of the amount that they participate in our procurement or our industries. Whenever a trade war happens, it's a tit for tat. No, but Canada's not just going to sit idly on this. And the cost at the end of the day goes to the consumer, and the consumer, whether that is a school board or that's a home builder, they're going to get a foundation from you, Mr. McSweeney, one way or another, and they're going to pay the extra dollars on that. So I think the reminder of that is going to be very key. And our trade commissioners and embassy staff have been doing a great job. We've asked them on this, and we will continue to do it.
Yeah.
Sorry, you want to say something?
Yeah, and as Catherine Cobden said, these are green materials. Canada is noted for its green materials. As in steel, we have the cleanest fleet of cement plants, in the world right here in Canada. That should be of interest to the American administration. And to going to Mr. Lewis's point, I think one thing you could do, and I heard Minister Wilkinson talk a little bit about it today, is the border carbon adjustment. You know, we have a very strong carbon pricing system here, pricing pollution here. And if companies are trying to export into Canada or the United States, there should be a border carbon adjustment to make sure and try and foster the buying of green products between Canada and the United States that has good, clean, sustainable carbon pricing policies that we all live by, than jurisdictions like Eastern Europe or China or other areas that do not have strong policies when it comes to carbon.
Thank you, Mr. Sarai.
Thank you.
We'll now go to Monsieur Savard-Tremblay. Vous avez 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay, you have 6 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you to all our witnesses. I'd like to put a question especially to Mr. McSweeney from the Cement Association of Canada, as well as Mrs. Cobden of the Canadian Steel Producers Association. You spoke about your productions in each of your respective sectors and indicating that these were very innovative industries, that you're at the forefront, at the avant-garde of research and green development, which is very much required and necessary in this time of climate change. Also, you've spoken about aluminum and it being one of the greenest in the world. But in the case of Mrs. Cobden, perhaps you could speak about bypassing customs duties, add customs. Have you ever seen any cases where there were insufficient raids, where there is a flagrant abuse? Are people really trying to fall through the cracks of the system by playing with the regulation, or is there simply no safety net at all?
Thank you. Thank you. Merci for the question. Sorry, I'm going to answer it en anglais. Yeah, so we have a very good trade remedy system. I don't want you to think of my remarks as we have a porous border where problems are taking place. I really want to stress we have a very good trade remedy system. That being said, it is just a fact that certain types of importers trying to get into our country will take all sorts of tactics to avoid paying the duties required on their products. This could include things like, a dutied country sending a steel to another country that's not duty bound, doing some slight transformation and then bringing it into our country. And so, as you can see, you can't, and we have no capacity in Canada to see the visibility of that transformation and to understand that that's coming actually from a country that should have a tariff applied to it. So indeed, I do feel while we have a good system, it must continue to move forward. And we are seeing the Americans do that. And so I just point to, again, in our effort, it's, I appreciate the discussion around reciprocity and retaliation and all of that. As an industry, we have been there for sure. But what we'd prefer to see is that we're actually linking arms with the Americans on this challenge and turning our attention outwards against those areas of concern.
Right. And, from our perspective, there is no greater societal challenge after COVID than climate change. And I can give you an example of where American companies will bring cement from Korea and China into the US, the Pacific Northwest, and then put it on a truck and bring it into British Columbia. And we know that British Columbia has had a carbon tax since 2008. The carbon tax is only applied to fuels used to make cement or make any other product in British Columbia. So this cement that comes from Asia by boat, causing 25% more greenhouse gases as it's shipped across the Pacific into Washington State, then by truck into BC. And so they avoid our carbon pricing system. They avoid the carbon tax. And from 2009 to 2014, 42% of the cement used in British Columbia came into British Columbia with no carbon tax through America, through Asia via America. So that's why we really do need a mechanism like a border carbon adjustment to protect our domestic industry, our union jobs, and our and the way our plants operate.
Mr. Chair, am I able to comment as well on the border carbon adjustment, or do you need to move on?
Vous avez 1 minute 30 secondes.
You have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Yeah, just to say that, I think the idea of a border carbon adjustment is quite important moving forward, but it should be done entirely in lockstep with our largest trading partner. And
Absolutely.
I'm sure,
yes.
I think I took that from Mr. McSweeney's remarks, but I just wanted to underscore that it's not a means, it is not something we would do against our major trading partners, but again, together, yes.
Donc, merci pour ces.
Thank you for these very detailed answers. Mr. McSweeney said that, yes, there was a kind of dumping taking place when products come directly from Asia. For steel, is Asia also the difficult area, the problematic one, as an origin of steel, which is then presented as being North American steel?
Yes, in fact, there is a global record, OECD. The OECD has a steel committee that tracks various developments, and there's a G20 committee as well on overcapacity. You will see that this is that the overcapacity that leads to dumping and there is a challenge not just in China. Certainly, China's quite egregious in this area, but also Iran, Turkey, and some other areas like the ASEAN region, for example.
Thank you. Merci, Monsieur Savard-Tremblay. We will now go to Mr. Blakey for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I think one of the things that I'm hearing this evening is that one of the ways that we could help Canadian industry increase its access to certain kinds of American contracts under the new administration would be to do a better job of greening Canadian industry, but also documenting the extent to which Canadian industry already is green. Now, some of that is because we don't have kind of environmental standards or criteria built into our own public bidding here in Canada, and we've heard that that's one of the reasons why our documentation system lags behind that of others, but also appreciate that that's not a system that you can build overnight, which I think is all the more reason to get started sooner rather than later. But I'm wondering if each of you could provide some perspective from your own industry, what the beginning of that process looks like. What are some of the things that you would like to see Canada start to do, not just in terms of the criteria that it sets for its own bids, although certainly if you have any commentary on that, that would be great, but also what that process of documentation begins to look like for Canadian businesses, and a pathway to get to where we have the kind of documentation we need in order to be competitive in other international markets where governments are bullish on wanting their public projects to meet stringent environmental criteria. And I'll start maybe with Ms. Cobden from the Steel Producers Association.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And indeed, I think that the ability, as I tried to make reference in my remarks, I think that's an important area for us to be pursuing with the United States. We have the credentials. Granted, they're going to get even better in terms of the industry's performance over the long run. I suggest here we don't want to make perfection the enemy of the good. I think we can start with some, interim steps to start documenting, as you say, that performance. In the steel industry, we happen to have international benchmarks now that's starting to show some of that. Obviously, ideally, over the long run, we'd go to like life cycle carbon analysis. There's the sort of full footprint. But I don't know that we need to have all that in place before we get started. I think you raise a very important point that this is, you know, an aspect that we need to move forward on. And I don't think we want to wait till we have spent, you know, 10 years perfecting the life cycle analysis approach.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. McSweeney.
Yes, along the same lines, Mr. Blakey, a lot can be done from the procurement side. We should be talking about always conducting a life cycle assessment. You know, building materials, use the building materials that give you the longest life cycle. Secondly, choose building materials that give you the lowest carbon footprint. And then finally, using best available technologies. And we have a raft in Canada from Savante to Carbon Cure to Solidia. And in our industry specifically, we have a new cement. It's called Portland limestone cement. It's the same cost as regular cement. And when you use this cement, it reduces greenhouse gases by 10% at no cost to the taxpayer or no cost to the customer. We've been trying for 5 years now to get this new cement mandated by the federal government and by provincial governments and by municipal governments. Imagine, I don't say build with concrete. I'd like you to build with concrete, but I don't say build with concrete. I say if you build with concrete, use the cement that's going to give you the lowest carbon footprint at no cost to the taxpayer.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Wilson, from the manufacturer's point of view, what are some of the things that we might be doing?
So I agree with my my counterparts with Catherine and Michael, and they're certainly looking at it from a very specific sector perspective. I'll take maybe a step back though. We've been working on procurement policy for as long as I can remember with Canadian governments. We can't even get governments to look at economic analysis. So I just want to take a little step back here. So 100% agree with where you're going on this, but we need to also have the economic analysis as part of that. The two go together. It's got to be an economic and environmental analysis. So there is none of that takes place really in any government anywhere in the country. There are some with infrastructure projects in Ontario and Quebec, but that's pretty much about it right now. So all of that is really important. And this is why we've really been pushing for an overall examination of Canada's procurement policies as part of the recovery action that the government's doing. It should be looking at environmental issues. It should be and seeing how we can green supply chains and how we can have low carbon inputs into it. But we also need to look at the overall economic impacts, which includes the environment as part of that. So agree with everything you're saying. Just want to add that little element on top of it to take a bigger picture look as well.
You have some sense as to this seems to me to be something that our trading partners are doing. Do you have a sense of why it is that there's been a reticence at both federal and provincial levels in Canada to engage in that kind of analysis?
I think it comes back to there's a misunderstanding of taxpayer value. I think there's a really big push for a long time in this country to make sure that you're not wasting money when you're buying things. And what ends up happening, and private sector does a lot of the same stuff. So this isn't pointing a finger just at the public sector on this. But what ends up happening in a lot of cases, Mr. Blakey, is that the government will only look at initial purchase price. They do not look at, like talking about Mr. McSweeney's comment, for example, they don't look at life cycle. They don't look at install price. They don't look at operational performance. They only look at initial purchase price because that's what government procurement is reviewed by and how the government looks at things. They're not looking at the longer term impacts of these things. So
yeah. And we're seeing some change, we're seeing some change in Mississauga, for example, is now doing this. When Minister Carol James in British Columbia as finance minister, she moved away from the lowest cost bid to the best bid wins. Because we all know when you have lowest cost, you have lowest value. Sorry, Mr. Chair.
That's okay. Thank you, Mr. Blakey. We'll now go to the second round, which will begin with 5 minutes for Mr. Hoback, please.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here. One of the questions I have with Buy America, the size that we're here, and we still don't know the exact size, but we know it's a big number. Is it big enough to bring in new capacity in the steel sector and the cement sector in the U.S.?
Could you expand on that, Mr.
Well,
Hoback?
Right now they're running at no excess capacity. So they're basically importing products from somewhere else, whether it's Canada or the US. Right. So with Buy American policies in place, and if they insist they have American product, is it big enough for a company to say, you know what, this is big enough, I'm actually going to spend X number of dollars to actually build a new cement facility or a steel facility?
You know, in the cement industry, it really is a closely controlled industry. There are about 25 major cement companies globally. And so the 5 cement companies that are in Canada are the same 5 companies that are in the US and plus another 5 or 7 on top of that. They make decisions on where to locate their cement plants, you know, in Canada and the US. If you take Lafarge or Lehigh Hanson. I
only have 5 minutes, so I have to go fast.
Yeah, okay. You know, that they decide.
Is it big enough?
Yeah. Probably not, because they can choose to get their products made in Canada and use advantage of our water system and rail system and ship it.
Okay.
Can I just add, though, I think that it will, I mean, there's no question it will drive investment to the U.S. steel mills, which will then disrupt our competitive position, right? So it will affect our competitiveness by driving, whether it takes us out, like, you know, I really understand your question. I can't really answer it, but I can say it's gonna have a competitiveness effect on us for sure.
Okay, so and then over to you, Mr. Wilson, and I'm worried about this with our small medium enterprises. You know, one of the complaints is when we had steel tariffs and then counter tariffs, they're complaining about the cost of steel in Canada getting so high they couldn't compete or get supply. In this scenario now, see a situation such as this where the U.S. is just sucking up all this amount of cement and steel and other raw goods. What's left for the manufacturers here in Canada, and how do we keep them here when we don't have a competitive platform to begin with in regards to comparing ourselves to the U.S.?
Well, I'd say that the U.S. and Canada are facing similar price issues with steel. So I don't think it's just a Canadian issue on that one, Mr. Hoback. So, but certainly as the U.S. is looking, if there's no new capacity brought on, I would expect the supply would get tighter. And I think we know what happens in that case is one of two things, right? Either the prices are going to go up or more stuff gets dumped in from offshore, which is actually the worst case scenario. We should be looking at how we can incentivize more production of that in Canada to supply manufacturers.
So that's the concern I have. You have a blip. You have something like this that goes on for 5, maybe 10 years at the most. And then all of a sudden you got this capacity sitting in the marketplace. What happens then? All of a sudden we've got too much capacity and we go down that cycle, that road again. So that's one of the concerns I have is how do you find a balance here, and how does the U.S. find a balance here where they don't create this huge amount of demand all at once and then all of a sudden have all these facilities left over at the end of the day that now dumps everything else in the world market, similar to what China's doing in other countries.
Sorry, Mr. Hoback, is that aimed at me generally or Catherine more specifically? Oh, yeah, it's hard to tell. It's a lot easier in person. Well, I think, you know, markets tend to work themselves out, but when governments overcook a market, you can actually have those longer term impacts. And we saw that, say, in Ontario with the Green Energy Act, where there was a whole bunch of production brought on board for producing certain products to feed into it, then all disappeared overnight. So we need to make sure we don't overcook it and that we're leveraging the assets that we have in existence across North America, which is why Buy Can-Am is so important.
Okay. And then back to the steel sector, then how do we manage a scenario like we had 2 years ago more efficiently so we don't end up shortchanging suppliers or manufacturers here in Canada with steel, yet still push back on having steel dumped into our markets and making sure that we've got a balance there? Is there a better way to do that than the way we did it last time?
So I'm not sure if you're referring to the Canada-U.S. dynamic on steel or
That's right.
Yeah.
Well,
so
it has an international dynamic. Unfortunately, it always does.
Yes,
right?
yes, it does, and I can speak to that for sure. I mean, the challenge is that there is this global overcapacity of steel, and it is looking for a home, and it's about 40 times the entire Canadian production. This is this is just the overcapacity. So there is this massive glut looking for a home, and they want to come in and pour into our marketplace and disturb our pricing scheme, and that is and right now the prices are decent, so there's more and more risk every day that keeps going on, and so this is a very big area of concern for us, and we do, but we share the same concern with the United States, and part of my point is I think we need to do some things on the home front Mr. Hoback, to improve our trade remedy system, as I've mentioned. And then we need to work with the United States lockstep to deal with this global challenge.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hoback. Thank you very much. We will now go to a split time between Ms. Bendaim and Ms. Romanato. Why don't you begin, Ms. Romanato?
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here. Mr. Wilson, you said two words that really piqued my interest, and I'm sure some of my colleagues will also, their ears will perk up: defense and procurement. Strong, secure, and engaged. The government committed to increasing our defense budget over the next 10 years by 70% to $32.7 billion. As you know, these funds are already booked in our fiscal framework. And the president and CEO of CADSI had testified before the Industry, Science, and Technology Committee as an opportunity for cheap stimulus for our economic recovery is to pull forward some of these projects that are already booked in there. Now, given that defense trade is exempt from most international trade agreements, and that we could technically use some existing policy, whether it be, industrial and technological benefits, national security exemptions, what are your thoughts on this as part of a larger conversation with the United States in terms of our NORAD agreement?
Do it sooner rather than later. I think I completely agree with the comment made by the president of CADSI. Absolutely. And I think we have, we've certainly worked with Canada's regional economic development agencies for a long time to make sure things like the regional trade benefits are fully taken advantage of in that defense procurement as well. So whether it's, planes or ships or anything else that the government's buying, we have a really, really big and really important defense industry and manufacturing industry in the country. And we should be accelerating the purchase of those things to help with the economic recovery without a doubt.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And I'm going to turn the rest of my time over to my colleague, MP Bendaim.
Thank you very much, colleague. And I too would like to thank all of the witnesses for joining us on a Thursday night to talk trade and Buy America. I don't think I have much time, so I'll address the question to Ms. Comden and to Mr. McSweeney. And let me begin by thanking both of you and your industries for the incredible work that you do here in Canada. And rest assured, every minister is raising Buy America with every counterpart in the United States. We are on this file, but we also want the help of industry. And Ms. Comden, you mentioned that there isn't enough supply of steel in the United States. Mr. McSweeney, you mentioned that the U.S. imports 16 tons of cement from Canada. I assume that's on a yearly basis. And we know that what Mr. Biden, President Biden is proposing is a $2.3 trillion plan. So it seems to me that there might be opportunity for you to be discussing with the industry in the United States, discussing also with your clients to see what their plans are in order to meet the demand that they will soon face. Is there opportunity from the industry perspective to have some pressure put on the United States so that we can all work together towards this one goal of ensuring that we continue to have access to this important market?
Yeah, I'd just like to compliment the ministers, Minister Ng, the Prime Minister's office, Brian Clow, and other officials at Global Affairs Canada and Foreign Affairs that we've been working with. They're clearly on top of the file. They're dealing with the USTR and other representatives. I just wanted to correct it. It's 6 million tons a year that we export to the U.S. So it's a large amount. It's 16% or 6 million tons. And so what we're doing is we know that the Americans, they don't really want to argue this over, the longest undefended border and we're best friends. It's all about jobs and jobs for Americans. And what we want to say we're having our American counterparts from the same multinational companies talk to their senators, talk to their House of Representatives, the border states governors, the border caucus. They're making the case on why they need to buy, in this case, cement, and I'm sure the steel industry is doing similar lobbying efforts as well. It's much cheaper. The supply chain will be met when you're starting $1 trillion infrastructure plan in the U.S. It's massive. You need the supplies, and you want to get the supplies, as cheaply as possible, as quickly as possible. And now you want to make sure you're buying clean. And I think both from the steel perspective and then the cement perspective, you are buying clean products.
Ms. Cobden, do you want to jump in quickly?
I do. I just want to
quickly, please.
Sorry. Just to also thank all the good work that's going on in terms of getting the message out to Americans, and we are doing the same. We keep in touch on this. It's important. We work across party lines, and we work across jurisdictions, and absolutely promote the benefits of the existing supply chain between Canada and the United States. It's sound, it's reliable, it's built on good labor practices, environmental practices, etc. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Savard-Tremblay, vous avez 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Savard-Tremblay, you've got 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. To come back to Ms. Cobden and Mr. McSweeney, increasingly in trade agreements, we're seeing protections or chapters regarding the rules of origin, where one tries to avoid dumping by saying, for instance, that the parts of steel or aluminum must come from the area covered by this new free trade area. And we've noted that one of the strategies, and we saw that in the debate on aluminum, was that they're talking about components, about parts, and not about aluminum itself, so that it would come in liquid form from Asia, and then when it's presented in parts, in large part, it comes from Mexico, then it's presented as a North American part. Have you seen any problems in the rules of origin protection measures in your respective industries?
So I just wanted to say that there is really, from a Canada-U.S. perspective, there shouldn't be space for any restrictions between friends and allies. So I think, first of all, on the topic of Canada-U.S., these shouldn't exist, and we had them exist in the past, and they won't hopefully exist again. And that's a very important task to ensure that they don't. In terms of, dumping, I think I've tried to address that already. Yes, there is a lot of dumping that it's the subject, and we are subject, and the risk of dumping changes, over time, depending on the conditions of a given market. And we do believe, and the industry, by the way, I haven't talked about this yet, but we are very engaged in trade cases, and it's, going after those organizations. So you ask if we see it, I say yes. We have multiple trade cases going on, and we, continue to use that trade remedy system to do so. But you can all help us by doing more on the types of measures I've already discussed in terms of improving our ability to see even more clearly the situation that you're painting.
Merci, Monsieur Tremblay. Merci. We will now go to the final question for 2.5 minutes to Mr. Blakey, please.
Thank you very much. One of the themes we heard in the previous panel was that beyond kind of environmental criteria for bids, another way into the U.S. market is to have some more supply chain coordination and recognize where there are gaps in North American supply chains and work collaboratively across countries to try and fill those gaps. Of course, that would require some serious industrial planning on Canada's part. And we know that Canada traditionally, at least for the last 20 or 30 years, is at a very hands-off approach to anything like industrial policy. So I'm just wondering if any of you would like to comment on the readiness of your industry to engage in some meaningful dialogue with the Canadian government towards a meaningful plan for your industry, and what you think some of the important considerations would be if the government got serious about embarking on real industrial planning in your industry.
Maybe I'll start. And so I just say, yes, we should have an advanced manufacturing strategy for the country. Call it an industrial strategy, call it anything you want, doesn't matter. But we've certainly, CME, and we're working with our colleagues at CSPA and the Cement Association for years, called on the federal and provincial governments to implement advanced manufacturing strategies for the country. But the issue about supply chains is very complicated. We don't even understand what we produce in Canada. And the beginning a year ago, when we were trying to figure out who makes medical devices in the country, was a good indication we had very limited idea of what actually is produced in this country. We need to map our own supply chains first. And I think in steel and cement and others, maybe bigger sectors might know, but generally speaking, understanding what our supply chains are and what our capabilities are of those supply chains are still not very well understood in this country. So
And so that would be one of the other benefits of embarking on this kind of more focused industrial policy would be that some of that groundwork is done. And so in the event of a crisis where suddenly particular supply chains matter more than others, we actually have a better handle on what it is we produce here and how we could modify production to meet, spontaneous needs, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah, the ability of companies to transition to making other things is critical to modern manufacturing, and that's what a lot of manufacturers were able to do during this crisis, right? Was to do that, but we struggled to do it because we didn't understand what the capabilities of the companies were in the first place. So absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey. Thank you very much. Thank you again to all the witnesses for taking this time on a Thursday night to enlighten us. I think we've had some great back and forth, great discussions, great questions. So thank you very much to all the witnesses and to all my colleagues. Thank you very much for your participation today. Were really good questions. And I look forward to seeing you all to the next meeting. Have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thanks, everyone.